2025. Right. Welcome, good evening, and we are having this class on descriptive writing for MyCAT 2025. Let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. Let's quickly look at the basics of the MyCAT exam. We have basically three sections. Section 3 is something that we are more familiar with, that is the aptitude part. Section 1 is the psychometric test, and Section 2 is the test that we are going to discuss today, which is the descriptive test. Okay. Quick understanding. The other areas have been covered, but just quickly to summarize, psychometric test is not really something that you can prepare. The only advice we can give is that you do not overthink it and try to be consistent. So it's basically 150 questions in 30 minutes. The rapid nature of the questions is designed so that you cannot plan your answers. Right? It is meant to evoke honest answers. So the same concept will be asked in multiple questions, right? So if you try to plan your answer, you could end up with discrepancies, right? So on one question, you answer in one way, another question which is asking the same concept, you ask in a different way. So it is essential to try and be consistent and honest. Otherwise, there is nothing much to prepare as far as psychometric is concerned. Section 3, of course, you're fairly well aware of how to handle it. Okay. So let's focus our time on the descriptive test. Okay. Fundamentally, if you look at the questions and the time allocated, right? 25 minutes for 4 questions, right? Keep that in mind, right? Again, this is deliberate. They're not giving you time to give you a very highly structured answer to any of these questions, right? The idea is to get people to kind of go with the flow, try to test what is spontaneous, natural creativity and thinking, rather than allow too much of analysis and planning for these kind of questions, right? So what can we do about it? Let's take one by one. These are some of the questions, right? So this was basically a question wherein which is typically called as a support and oppose argument types and all that, right? So you take a particular a premise and then you write in support of it, then you write against it, and then you try to synthesize and try to find a balance. Right? So fundamentally, we are looking at what is essentially called here as finding the mean, what Aristotle would have called as the golden mean types, right? So in a way, question 1 and question 2, you have to ensure that you are neutral, in the sense that you do not take an absolutist position in either question 1 and question 2, and therefore allowing you enough space for to try and balance the two viewpoints and try to find an acceptable compromise. Okay, now understand this. Here 300 words clearly is the upper limit. I think this is something very important for all of us to understand. People look at 300 words and say, look, I have to finish 300 words. 300 words takes a lot of time to type, right? I don't know what your individual typing speeds are, but I would guess there'll be anywhere between 40 to 50 words per minute, right? So simply typing in these words will take a certain amount of time, right? So understand that again, there is not much time to plan. Right? So when we say 300 words, as I said, it's an upper limit. I don't think any of you should plan to go anywhere near 300 words. Even something like 120 words, 150 words, well put, is pretty reasonable. Okay. Now, so suppose we are looking at this idea, right? So perfectionist and compromise, right? So the supporting view would be why perfectionists are required. the opposing view would be why compromise is better than trying to go for perfection. And then the third one is a synthesis where we are looking at, what is the best balance between perfection and compromise. Now, quickly, what ideas can we look at? I'll give you a little bit of time. Quickly come up with ideas. Don't overthink it. What ideas are for question 1 in support of perfection? Right. Right. Okay. So, yes, Miraj says the quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. Okay. So, yes, Miraj says the quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. Okay. So, yes, Miraj says the quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. Okay. So, yes, Miraj says the quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. Okay. So, yes, the quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. So, yes, quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. So, yes, quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. So, yes, quality of work that we are looking at. Okay. I think if I try to keep looking at, I was trying to look at the channel on the YT channel on the phone that is creating echo. So let's stop looking at that. Yeah. So clearly, there are certain times when perfection is required. No, you can give examples there, right? You could look at sport, for example. You could look at art, for example. You could look at something that requires perfection. Let us say a medical treatment, for example. So these are cases where perfection is needed, and there are cases uh, where anything short of perfection will have a negative effect. And there are also cases where perfection, you have the time to go for perfection, right? And when you can't, so one is you're creating situations and say, okay, these are situations in which perfections are required. Second, you could look at, there are certain types of people who are perfectionists, and you might need some of them to be on your team, maybe one or two perfectionists. You can't have an entire team of perfectionists, right? So as a manager, if you have a team of people, you could afford to have one or two who are perfectionists, but you need to also step in at certain times and say, okay, for this particular project, we cannot, time is of the essence, and therefore good enough. I will say when it is good enough. Right? For example, let us say as a team, you're developing a particular app. Now, an app in some ways is also a work of art. You can keep improving it, right? But at some point, you have a deadline. You also need to get it launched. So, for example, a theory in business is called a MVP, or a minimum viable product. We're saying that you don't wait for a product to become absolutely perfect. You say that, look, once I have something that is good enough, then I will take it and launch it. Okay. What arguments against, we just heard a few arguments against uh, perfection. Right. Okay. So a way to balance these two could be to look at, you start with a minimum viable product, you launch it, and then each iteration you keep improving it such that you end up at a level which it becomes perfect. Okay. So a lot of these are things that we look at, right? Then there are other things there where we say, okay, any work that is going to stay for posterity, right? Any work, let us say, that will carry the name of the creator. These are areas where you say, look, I want to kind of ensure that I reach the maximum possible quality that I can get on a particular area, right? Given amount of time, given the importance that perfection has, there are situations where you could need that perfection, and there are situations where the time is of an essence, and the quality that is needed is enough. Okay, just 1 second. I think we've gone too far back. Just 1 second. I have to go that side. Right. Now look at this particular viewpoint, right? Now, this is one area where one particular side looks easier to defend, right? So we've been hearing a lot of talk and articles, etc., viewpoints which says that emotional intelligence is vital for professional success, right? So how do you get ideas for the opposite view? Okay, that is when the third question can give you a bit of an idea, where you say how managers can nurture emotional intelligence in teams while maintaining focus on technical skills, right? Again, here we give examples of the types of tasks where emotional intelligence is more important, and types of tasks where technical skills are more important. And one of the needs why we say diversity is required in teams is that so you can have people of both kinds. Right. Now, how do you deal with these kind of questions? Right. Now, clearly, for example, if you look at the practice exercise 1, where we talk about perfection, given that we have about 6 minutes for this kind of a question, for each question, perfection is something that we can't really get. Right. So typically, we divide the 6 minutes into something like 1.5, 2 minutes for jotting down ideas, and then typically the remaining 4 minutes for actually writing that points, right? Now there are some cases. Okay, how do you support a viewpoint? There are three ways that you normally support a viewpoint. One is you have facts or data, which is typically evidence, right? So if you can find facts or data, it need not be very accurate data. You can say, okay, there is this particular, and you don't have to give a lot of, you know, particular Stanford study by Professor Richman in the year 2021 types. And they said there is a well-known Stanford study which has proven that teams with emotional intelligence or managers with emotional intelligence tend to be more successful, and so on and so forth. Okay, the second part is expert opinion. Okay, another way to try and support a particular viewpoint is that you provide expert opinion, right? Wherein say, okay, this I'm quoting a particular, let us say, entrepreneur or a manager or a professor or some other expert in that particular field, and you can say, okay, this is the viewpoint of that particular person. And because the nature of the person is that he's an expert connected to the field, that opinion then tends to substantiate that particular point. Right? So we have seen now two ways in which you can support a particular claim. One is through facts and data, which is evidence. The second is expert opinion. The third, which is perhaps the easier one, especially when you're short of time like this time, is that you use analogies and examples. Let's say, consider a situation where we have a team of people who are working remotely and have multiple and come from multicultural backgrounds. Or consider a team of scientists, each of them is individually successful and has a reasonable amount of ego, and they tend to have clashes regarding whose ideas are better or which way somebody should move, and etc., etc. So these are again, you are picking examples to try and make a case, whether you want to make a case for emotional intelligence or against emotional intelligence. And these examples can be of hypothetical, like we just talked, particularly a set of scientists who are working on a project and each of them is individually famous, etc. Or it can be very specific. You can say, for example, let us consider the case of somebody like Elon Musk or somebody like uh, Steve Jobs. Right? Steve Jobs, for example, could be an example for perfectionist. He would personally ensure that every element of the design of any Apple product would have his personal approval before he would move. The font on which the engraving or product description is there, that has to be important. The particular shade of color that is being used, the way in which an app has to be designed, the interface, every particular aspect he would have tight control. So that is, for example, an example of perfectionism. Similarly, you have examples of people who are very high on emotional intelligence and they tend to empower their teams to try and make. So somebody like Professor Abdul Kalam would be an example of somebody who managed a team of scientists, putting his own ego behind and therefore ensuring that the team actually succeeded. Then there is a very well-known case of Abraham Lincoln, where it talks about team of equals, where he actually drew. He was facing a difficult time in the history of the country when he took up presidency, and then he took up people whom he had defeated in the election. He took up people who could not stand him and could not stand each other, and then kind of made them work together. And these are again examples in which you can support either viewpoint. Okay, let me just check if there are queries that I can look at. 1 second. No, Hriz, I think in this case, we have to go straight to the point. There's hardly any time. So when we are looking at an average sentence having about 10 words, if you are saying 100, 120 words, we are looking at 10, 12 sentences. Right? It might make sense for you to actually practice it by typing and then checking out how much time it would take to actually type out certain number of sentences. Right? So you get about a minute, minute and a half to organize thoughts so that you get some form of structure. Do not be too harsh on yourself in practice when you write these essays, because given the amount of time, quality is very difficult to get. Right? So it looks like, acha, this is a very bad thing. I won't get good marks for this. But that's because you're given a topic right away and you're barely given any amount of time to structure it. So with that perspective, understand that expectation is not going to be very high. No, for the third part, we're trying to find a middle path. For example, here, right? Support the view and importance of work-life balance. Right? So here we have a lot of examples. This is again something that normally we would like to believe, right? Imagine how somebody as famous as Narayan Murthy was completely trolled when he said that people should work 70 hours a day kind of stuff. Right? But if you actually, okay, so that it's important. We can talk about burnout and we can talk about how happy people are more productive and how having overworking can lead to poor physical health, poor mental health, poor decision making, and so on and so forth. That's much easier. Arguing against will be tough. Now, here you have to, even if you personally believe in work-life balance, you'll have to go a little beyond. And then give situations where you have to focus on the excellence. For example, you have a particular deadline to launch. And a lot of you who have worked would know what happens during deadlines. Work-life balance tends to get compromised. But it is necessary, otherwise you will not meet the deadline. Or when you have a crisis at work. Right. So for short periods of time, it is possible that you may have to compromise on work-life balance so that you are able to achieve professional excellence. For example, let us say a major customer of yours is facing a crisis. The entire team might work all night to try and fix that. You can't do it every day because that would burn yourself out. But there'll be times where you have to say, look, at this particular time and situation, I am going to focus on the professional responsibility and putting my personal life on the back burner for some time. And then Q3, that is when you find the balance, saying that a good leader or a manager would know that when would you prioritize what? When would you prioritize business outcomes? When would you prioritize work-life balance? Saying that, okay, we've pushed very hard for a particular product launch or a deadline. Now I'm going to give you some time off. Exactly. Yes. So I think it's common. I think what Narayan Murthy was also saying is that it is expected of younger people to put in a lot more work in terms of number of hours. And part of it is, it's a learning curve. So young people in most areas, young lawyers, for example, associates who are working, there's absolute grind. No, in this case, they're asking for it. Right? Is that not what the question is asking for? So if the question was different, then the situation was different. But in this case, it's a very specifically designed question which is seeking that. Right? So in the past paper, maybe the question was different. So if they're asking you to support only one point, in that essay, you support only that point. So in Q1, you only support importance of work-life balance. In Q2, you basically says that professional excellence trumps work-life balance. And in Q3, you find the balance. Right? Okay, so not much. See, I think the way the exam is designed is that very little that training or coaching can do to you, except give you some tips like what I'm doing today and a little bit of practice that you can go down. And then on that day, see, the worst thing that can happen is that you mismanage the time and are unable to answer the questions. Right? I'm not so worried that quality will go for a toss kind of stuff. You're not going to make perfect legal arguments in any of these cases in the kind of time that they will give. Right? So idea is a reasonably good essay is what you will write. Make sure that you know that there are 4 questions which have to be completed in 25 minutes. So you have that roughly 6 minutes kind of a balance in mind. You don't want to have a scenario where you come to the 4th question, which is actually a fun question, and then you see that you have only 2 minutes left. Yes, in Q1, you back the argument, which is that work-life balance is critical. Without that, productivity will suffer. In Q2, you say that focus on work-life balance will compromise professional excellence. And saying that professional responsibilities and excellence actually trumps work-life balance. In Q3 is when you kind of try to find the best of both Q1 and Q2 and try to find a balance. Is that clear, Parth? Okay. See, again, Hrid, what you're looking at is an ideal case. You just don't have the time for this, right? So fundamentally, what we are saying is, yes, the classical structure is introducing an introduction, supporting points, and conclusion. Okay, so when we look at that, for example, here in question 1, okay, for example, if you look at question 1, what are you looking at here? We are looking at, you start with a claim. You say that considerable amount of research exists which shows that a good work-life balance is not only fair for the employees but also leads to better productivity. And then you give examples or supporting evidence, and then conclude. Therefore, it is imperative for companies to ensure that their employees have a good work-life balance, not only in the interest of the employees, but also in the interest of the company. And that's your conclusion. Then you go to Q2. And Q2, then you say that the nature of work that we have today would require professional excellence, and there are many situations wherein over focus on work-life balance will actually compromise professional excellence. If a company fails in its primary duty to its customers, and then the company does not survive in the kind of atmosphere we have, therefore over prioritizing work-life balance does not make sense. And then you give examples. I think they will see. There is no evidence that there is no real evidence as to how will you be judged. But I think the focus will be on, it's a test of creativity. It's a test of, logic, right? Not really a test of spelling or grammar. Though I think grammar, if you make major errors in grammar, that essentially things which can damage the meaning of the sentence, then you might be penalized. Otherwise, if you misspell a word, it is more likely to be, what would a person reading the essay think? That you don't know the spelling, or that, look, you were trying to type with a deadline and then you made a mistake. So I don't think spelling is going to be such a major issue. But yes, bad language in terms of poor grammar, which kind of changes the meaning or damages the meaning of what you're trying to say, then that would be an issue. Yes. Okay. So quick summarization. What is the claim? Okay. In the introduction, state the claim straight away. Make a claim. Right? For example, in Q1, the claim is that work-life balance is good for productivity, and therefore companies should ensure work-life balance of employees. Then what are the 3-4 points that you can give to support this particular thing? How do you support? You could give facts or data. 2, you could give expert opinion. 3, you could give analogy and you can compare it. Okay, consider a scenario like this, that kind of stuff. Or you could give examples. The second, okay, so the other part which I said is very important is make sure that the time is balanced so that you are able to do justice to all the 4 questions. Right? It is better to have 4 average answers than 2 very good answers, and then you are hardly able to even attempt the 3rd and 4th question. Right? Anyway, remember 10, 10 and 20 marks. The 3rd question that has the maximum marks. So make sure you do justice. Okay. So let's go to the fun part now. Another example. Right. So this is a story writing kind of a thing. So this is something that a lot of us are not very familiar because we've hardly written stories. Right? If you're one of the lucky few who have actually written stories, then you have some idea. But most of us don't write. We read stories. We don't even read that much fiction these days. But we don't, therefore we are unfamiliar with this particular time. And again, the pressure, right? Assuming that you divide the 25 minutes equally, you have another 6 minutes here. Right? What do you have to do here? There are 4 pictures given. you have to create a story which connects all the 4 pictures. There are only 2 rules. One is connect all the pictures. Second is ensure that the sequence is indicated first. So, for example, if you want to say that, look, my sequence is 3, 4, 2, and 1. That means I'm going to focus on the boy gazing upwards first, the sky the second, the rocket the third, and fourth is then the last picture would be the vision of a future city. Right? So you have to indicate the sequence and then you have to write a story. Okay. So let's understand a little bit about story writing. What is the major problem here? The major problem that will happen is people end up writing non-fiction. People end up writing a descriptive essay rather than a story. It's much easier to write a descriptive essay here, right? For example, we can say something like, people have always looked at the sky and space with a sense of wonder, but it is only in recent years that humanity has, uh, escaped the Earth through rockets and satellites, and they've gained a lot of knowledge, and that is how they're going to create cities of the future. We may end up colonizing Mars, etc. Okay, just 1 second. I think there's a problem with. 1 second. Yeah. Right. Can you still see? I don't think you can see, right? Let me represent. For some reason, the PPT just shut down. Okay. Yeah. Right. So what I just described, that from time immemorial, humans have been looking at the sky with a sense of wonder. They've created stories and legends and myths about how about stars and moon and sky. It is only in recent times that they have actually been able to explore the future, and we may then end up colonizing planets like Mars, etc. But that's unfortunately a descriptive essay. There is no story element. What really should a story have? What are the key elements of a story? Characters, right? Story needs to have characters, right? So, for example, that young boy here could be a character. If you generalize him as like human child, then there is an issue. Okay, character is first, plot is second. Of course, there are people who say plot is first, but okay, doesn't matter, right? So you need to then introduce a character. You can give a name. Right? More important than name, you have to give some description of the character and make it relevant or realistic. Somebody like, when you should hear the description and say, this is an actual person. We could have a person like that. Right? But you have limited amount of time. So you can't describe a character too long. So one trick here is to, of course, the boy can be anybody. But then why use a real life character then when you're creating a story? You can use Musk's story with a different name. Right? So, okay, good. So one shortcut here in character introduction is highlight 1 or 2 attributes, distinctive attributes. Right? What is Raja Harishchandra? Just as an example, right? So obviously he's a human being. He was a human being, so you could have a lot of characteristics about him. whether it was good looking or bad looking or like humorous or witty or stuff or whatever. But the most important attribute which describes the person is honesty. Right? Just like when you think Gandhi, what do you think? Non-violence. A boy who became a man. Picture says boy, so you can't start with a man, but then you start with a boy who became a man and then achieved, let us say, scientific success or became a space explorer or whatever, colonized Mars, whatever you want to do. Right? Because all the four pictures have to be connected. Okay. So, sorry, where was I? Yeah. So, how to quickly define a character? Pick one or two attributes which define him. Curiosity. For example, in this case, you could say he was a very, very curious boy. He could be a lot of other things. Maybe he also liked chocolates. But the key point here is curiosity. So that is going to be the defining attribute that we will use. Right? So when you introduce a character, pick one or two quick characters. It could even be a flaw. For example, stubbornness. He would never accept that he was wrong. And that stubbornness maybe later turned out to be a strength. Right? The second important thing is a setting. Okay, where is this boy? He can't live anywhere. He has to live in a particular place. So you could say, again, 2-3 quick words. Like he grew up in a small village and was an orphan, for example. Or you could say he was a poor boy from Tirunelveli in Tamil Nadu, wherever, whatever you want. But idea is you pick a setting which quickly connects with people. If you say poor boy from village, that's enough. It gives a picture to people. Right? So character, setting. Right? And then the plot. See, plot mein basically kya hai na? What constitutes a good plot? I remember my Micah interview long time back, right? Where I found out later that the interviewer was an advertising guru, and he had asked me about, we were discussing about different advertisement. He says, what is one element in an advertisement that makes it memorable? I think the same could be. We could talk the same about what makes a story memorable, right? Yeah. What captivates people? What captivates people is drama, right? So, what is a good plot? It has drama. What is drama? Drama is really conflict. In one word, conflict. Okay. Suppose I say that there was a large unsinkable ship that was made. It was the largest ship of its kind, and it was fitted with all kinds of luxury. 1,000 passengers traveled in the first voyage, which was completed successfully. They had a great time. Does it make a story? Thousands of ships have actually done that. But does it make a good story? It doesn't, because there is no drama, there is no conflict. Now I change that unsinkable ship and say it was a large unsinkable ship filled with luxury passengers, and it hit an iceberg on the first voyage and it sank. There is a story. Of course, you also want to put in a poor boy, rich girl and add a love story, then yeah, that makes more drama. Right. So fundamentally, conflict chahiye. Somewhere the character gets into trouble. How the character gets out of trouble is your story. Right? It could be anyway. Right? So his father was killed by an evil uncle. That could be Lion King, it could be Bahubali. Right? Actually, there are a lot of similarities between Lion King and Bahubali. But anyway. Right? So that is one. Or the conflict could be internal. Something that some internal problem that a student is that a person is facing. For example, the boy has dyslexia, which is your तारे जमीन पर. You could have a purpose, a person who lacked purpose and then kept looking for purpose. So again, maybe he came to India to meet Neem Karoliwala Baba and learned something and then went back and became Steve Jobs. So fundamentally, you want to look at some kind of trouble, conflict, internal, external, which a person has. And then what kind of decisions or actions the person takes. And how it leads to resolution of the conflict or drama. Yes, if the conflict is resolved, then it's a happy ending. Otherwise, it could be a sad ending also. But yeah, either way, there is a climax. And you have to do it quick. Right. Now, there are three different ways to tell a story. First person point of view, second person point of view, third person point of view. But anyway, we are not going into story writing class because we are looking at an exercise which has about 5-6 minutes for us to do. The simplest is the third person. First person is you tell a story from the character. You talk about I. I woke up in the dead of the night in a strange hotel room and had no memory of how I got there. That's a starting point of a story, right? How quickly, setting aa gaya, you woke up, hotel room, unknown place, you have no idea how you came in. That's a conflict. Straight away jumping into the plot. But that's an I part. That's a first person narrative. Okay. Second person narrative is very complex. We'll not get into that. Third person narrative is the more straightforward, where the person telling the story is not the character. First person narrative means the character is telling the story. That is why I went, I did, I woke up and stuff like that. The third person narrative is a more common, where the person telling the story is a narrator. He is a sutradhar. So then you say, okay, Joe found himself falling off the ship into the water. That's how you start, like jump into the action text. So you are telling the story of Joe and what happens to Joe. That's the most common and that's a simpler one. So ideally you would like to stick with that. But yes, if the picture gives you an idea, you can go for first person narrative. Don't try the second person narrative. So priority third person narrative. Sometimes you may say you want to tell a story from I perspective. It happened to me kind of stuff. That's okay. Right? So introduce the character, one or two attributes about the character, what kind of a person he is, one or two sentences of where he is, what is the scenario, right? It could be even one sentence. Like we said, poor boy growing up in a village. Either way, your choice. First or third is your choice. Right? So don't take too long, which is why I said the shortcut to character creation is talk about one or two defining attributes. He was a very smart kid, a prodigy. That defines a lot of things. Because the minute you say prodigy, people get some idea in the mind. Arey, boy genius kaise hota hai? Right? Or he was an extremely short-tempered person and a grumpy person. Mind में लोगों को idea आ जाता है. Right? So one or two defining attributes of the person, then the setting. वो कहाँ का रहने वाला है? Or where he grew up, or where he is, or what is the environment around him, kind of thing. And after that, just jump into what is the conflict? How does the problem happen? Right? Some problem should happen. The problem could be because of an external villain or some other circumstance. It could be an earthquake, it could be a storm, it could be a cyclone, kuch bhi. It could be parents who don't understand him. It could be girlfriend who dumps him, kuch bhi. But there has to be a problem. And then what the person does to resolve the problem is your action, and the climax is the resolution. ठीक है? So और ज्यादा कुछ बोलने का नहीं है, and as I said, we don't have time, right? So you can come up with ideas. Take 2 minutes and come up with ideas for this one. अच्छा स्क्रीन नहीं है क्या? Can't see the screen? Okay, I thought I was sharing. Oh, sorry. Okay, just 1 second. Let me see. Now? Okay, now. Okay. My fault. Yes, any ideas? Obviously, we can't do the full story, but some ideas that come. For example, if you're looking at the boy as a character, we used to look up and wonder about the stars. Now we just look down and worry about a place in the dirt. Okay. How does that connect all four? But anyway, the idea is don't use we, create a character. Because when you say we used to look up, then it becomes more descriptive prose. Yes, we need to mention that seems to be this thing. Indicate the picture sequence and create a story. Right. For example, let's say we start with the boy. How would you describe the boy? One attribute, two attributes, max. What are the defining attributes of that boy? Okay, very good part, right? Yeah, you could say a boy called Elon. Yeah. Why not? You can steal plots if it fits. Okay. Orphan living with a grandma on remote location is very nice for setting, right? But what's the character like? Yes. Yes, part. Make sure. Okay. The only thing missing is what is the difficulty? What is the conflict? So invent something. Let's say, how does that boy who dreams of space But he's living in a remote location. How does he get there? Somehow he learns that MIT is the place where space technology is, research is happening. And then his dream becomes to get to MIT. How he struggles, gets a scholarship, somehow manage, maybe he's an illegal immigrant to US, and then he says, my dream is to go to MIT, somebody sponsors him, whatever. Okay. Great. Okay, nice. It's not really a concrete jungle. There seems to be greenery there, but yeah, I get the point. But again, you are describing the photos. Character, some kind of a conflict, some events are happening. There was a boy, something happened to him, something happened, he did something, then he got into trouble or he faced challenges and he achieved something. Okay, good. But I think you're able to look at it, right? So if you look at the boy, think, wonder, curiosity, that kind of stuff. That kind of describes the boy. You look at the sky and say, sky is something that fascinates him, and he would, endlessly gaze at the sky when other kids were playing small games and stuff like that. That kind of stuff, right? The third could be, the first picture could be something very specific, like a modern city of the future, or it could be a vision of what the boy wants to achieve. That's okay. I think basic idea you're getting, right? Let's go down to one more. You can see this. So certain things to learn here, right? One is a very literal way of looking at the picture. The second is a more metaphorical way of looking at the picture, right? For example, the first picture is a shipwreck, right? So literally you could take it as a shipwreck, include it in our story, right? But you could look at a metaphor for a person who has faced some unforeseen circumstances or tragedy or disaster. It could be a metaphor for any kind of disaster that has happened. Right? Similarly, the second picture talks about one tree in an entire desert. Right? Now that could be taken literally, or it is more likely to be a metaphor. Harsh environment, difficult conditions, but one tree stands tall. So it's a sign of resilience, ability to survive, to fight adverse conditions, and so on. Okay. Similarly, the third pic is about a small, plant coming up, and there is a small water droplet there, right? So it could be literally a plant that we are talking about, which grows into the tree in picture 2. That is one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, okay, it symbolizes renewal, and it symbolizes hope, it symbolizes fresh beginnings, etc., etc. Fourth picture is a reasonably old person. The lines on his face reflect that he has undergone, he has seen or experienced a lot of things in life. He has faced difficulties. He is gazing into the horizon. Again, two parts. He could be looking back at his life and what happened, or he could be looking forward and saying, look, I'm looking at fresh beginnings. Exactly. You could make a Robinson Crusoe out of him, a person who was shipwrecked, reached a deserted island, right? Had basically some supplies to last for some time, almost lost hope, then saw a small plant, nurtured the plant into a tree for next whatever 6, 7, 10 years, whatever Robinson Crusoe managed, and then finally got out of that island. Sure, anything. All I'm just saying is try to just look behind the obvious. So think of a person that is given there in terms of what it comes. Does it come across as experience, or just old or tired or weather beaten, or a survivor who has faced hardships, etc., etc. Right? Again, remember, who writes a short story in 5 minutes, 6 minutes? Right? It's not going to be great. So acceptance that, look, within the constraints of 5 6 minutes, come up with something reasonable. If it has a character, some kind of a plot, and manages to connect the four stories, I think you've done a good job. Very nice. Marmik, that's beautiful. So you're actually looking at God himself as a kind of weather beaten, ageless person. That's a personification of God. Okay, very nice. Here we have a theme. The theme is of rainfall, right? But picture one is about a boy who is playing in the rain. For this boy, rain is not something uncomfortable, not something which is a hindrance to daily life, making traffic worse or getting to office difficult and something like that. Rain is something to be enjoyed. Similarly, picture four is about, the colors of the umbrellas, talks about life, about, positive moments about life. And then the mother and the child holding hands, how they are enjoying a moment of togetherness in the rain, kind of stuff. Uh, Picture 2 and 3 could be seen as how people tend to look at something magical like rain as merely a hindrance, and they kind of force their way through so that they get back to do their day-to-day jobs and stuff like that. But these are the descriptive parts. You have to find a way to connect them to a story. Okay, one last. It's a little easier. It's a little easier because it's the same characters. At least the male character seems the same in all the pictures. Very nice, Mardi. Yes. I think one small thing is the observation part. I underlined a few things. Sorry, or highlighted a few things. First picture has a laptop screen with some code on it. So yeah, some connection to code. Second picture has some app being displayed, or a set of app or a suite of apps, I don't know, being described, and there's an audience and people are clapping. Similarly, the fourth pic has the boy working on a computer and the girl doing some kind of a work on a pencil and a paper text, all that, right? Now, you could say they're working independently, but they're part of one family, or they could probably jointly be working on something. Or the boy is a coder and the girl is his sister and she helps him with some creative ideas because she is the artistic creative type, and boy uses her inputs and then kind of makes a successful app, and then they get awards or I don't know what. Yeah. Yes, very nice part. That's good. Yeah, it's just that little bit, obviously. Yeah, comment has some limits. So how do you expand this idea, right? So you could say Nathan is a very good coder, and you could say Natalie is a creative type who would sketch and make plans and designs and stuff like that. And there was a particular app design competition which asked for a very difficult challenge, and how they overcome the challenge and kind of win the award and stuff like that. Maybe go to Shark Tank. Yeah, little more. At least one thing about the character, at least one identifying attribute about the character, and something about the challenge that they're facing. Why is it? What was the difficulty that they solved? Okay, so I don't know how helpful it has been, but I'm doing my best. The exam is a very difficult exam to try and train people for, the descriptive part. Yes. See, there are more elements about storytelling, but then again, we have very limited time. For example, one thing people talk about is character arc, how characters evolve. But that's very tough in a short story. In a novel kind of a thing, you have a character becoming more mature, better, his personality improving, changing kind of stuff. So that's tough. Yeah. Yes, good. Good, Shikhar. That brother sister creates a dynamic between characters. That's interesting. So, any other areas, doubts that you have, then we'll wind up in the next few minutes. Yes. So, typically, I think it should not be obviously point wise, but when you have a new point, you start a new paragraph. So it should be three very short paragraphs. If somebody says make three arguments for, then they should be three short paragraphs, or they can be three short paragraphs. Otherwise, you could also say that all my 3 points will be in the main body. Introduction is one small paragraph. My 3 points will be in the main body, and the conclusion will be a third paragraph. That's also a way to do it. But it should look like an essay, not as a point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure, but typically it's in that. See, it's only a qualifying exam. I think about 80-85 के range में रहता है normally. The other important thing is CAT is primarily a qualifying exam, which means that once you qualify, through CAT. After that, the CAT score plays no role. See, I think partly by being honest, Parth. Right? So, for example, let us say if you are not a very outgoing person, right? But in some of the questions, you try to claim that you are an outgoing and a very gregarious person. In some other question, it will be contradictory. That's the problem. That's why basically the idea is psychometric profile should come out as one personality. It should not come out as an inconsistent personality. There's nothing wrong in being, let us say, less outgoing, a little more of an introvert or a little more of an extrovert is fine. The problem comes when some questions indicate extrovert, some questions indicate introvert. That means somebody is trying to cheat the exam. So think about what kind of a person you are and try to get your answers to be consistent with that. Anyway, you hardly have time. Like 10 seconds for each question, 15 seconds for each question. So you won't have too much time to overthink it. Again, to some extent, it makes sense. Yes, nobody is completely unidimensional. There will be some elements of contradiction. For example, with close friends, I'm actually very talkative and witty. With slightly, with say strangers or less well-known people, that I tend to be more reserved. That's possible. Okay, that's about the aptly part. See, I will not talk about any specific strategy, but look at it. The VA questions typically take less time. VA and GA are the ones that should take less time. Right? So average VA question, typically, especially the vocab, grammar, word association, these kind of things are 10 seconders, 15 seconders. So plan accordingly. Similarly, general awareness is probably a 5-minute kind of a thing. So if you take 10 minutes for VA and 5 minutes for So if you take 10 minutes for VA and 5 minutes for GA, then you have the remaining time for the QADI as well as the divergent convergent. I think the extra time is where you need for the quant part. So there you might need 30-35 minutes. So plan accordingly. Okay. Any other questions? So little bit of vocab is where I think you can do some amount of revision, right? A few days of reading a Norman Lewis or a Wilfred Funk can help, because these are like, the word and you immediately get an answer. So vocab in that sense is probably a scoring area that you could look at. Again, general awareness is difficult to prep for, but at least make sure that current happenings in the last 6 to 8 this thing are you keep track of. Yes, there is no sub time limit for section 3. It is your call how you allocate the time. 80 minutes, 80 questions, you decide the allocation. And you can start in any order, yes. Start with something that you're good at. so that you get some confidence out of it. But decide now which order you will go, right? And because once you decide the order, you can also decide your own internal time limits. Suppose you say verbal ability, I'll start with verbal ability. So internally, I've set myself a time of 10 to 12 minutes. Then I'll go to GK, I've set myself 5 to 7 minutes there, like that. I would do quant last, but that's a personal choice. Primarily because if I'm forced to leave questions, I would rather leave a quant question than a verbal question. Not that I'm bad at quant. It is just that for the same amount of time, I'll probably get more marks in the verbal side or the general awareness side or even the divergent convergent reasoning side. ठीक है. So I think that's broadly it. Yeah, it's a personal choice. Yes. ठीक है. So that's it. Thank you very much and hope I have been of some help. Thank you. Good night.